WNBA is in a full-blown meltdown after its playoff ratings dropped like a rock. And it's all because their star player, Caitlin Clark, is no longer in the picture. The league was riding high on the Clark effect, pulling in huge viewership numbers. But now that she's out, they're left scratching their heads wondering where all the fans went. Spoiler, they left with her. Clark wasn't just playing basketball, she was carrying the league on her back. Her games brought in over 2 million viewers, a number the WNBA hadn't seen in decades. People who didn't even care about basketball were tuning in just to watch her. Her jersey sales were through the roof, and Indiana Fever games were packed, while other teams struggled to draw crowds. But now that she's out of the playoffs, the WNBA's viewership has crashed and the arenas are emptier than ever. Imagine going to a concert, but the main performer leaves after the first song. That's what the WNBA feels like without Clark. Before we continue, do yourself a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. You don't want to miss more takes like this. Back to the drama. ESPN is feeling the pain too. Without Clark, their ratings have tanked, the excitement is gone, and viewers just aren't sticking around. The league still has talented players, but let's be real, fans were there for Clark. Now the WNBA is left scrambling, trying to figure out how to stay relevant without their biggest star. It's looking like their toughest battle ahead might not be on the court, but against irrelevance. Caitlin Clark's entrance into the 2024 WNBA season wasn't just a big deal, it was like a meteor hitting the basketball world. Before we dive into the drop in ratings that came later, let's talk about how Clark completely shook up the league from the moment she stepped on the court. Her debut was nothing short of spectacular, pulling in an incredible 2.12 million viewers. And before you think, well, that's not so impressive, let's put it in perspective. Before Clark came along, the WNBA was used to averaging around 394,000 viewers per game. That's right, a massive jump, and it wasn't just a one-off. Throughout the entire season, Clark's games consistently brought in over 1 million viewers, making the 2024 season the most watched in 24 years. Not bad for a rookie, huh? But Clark's appeal wasn't just about her basketball skills, though. Let's be honest, those were jaw-dropping. People who wouldn't normally care about basketball, let alone the WNBA, were suddenly glued to their screens. Clark wasn't just playing basketball, she was putting on a show. Her insane assists and mind-blowing three-pointers made people question if she was even from this planet. It was like she had a cheat code. You didn't have to be a basketball junkie to appreciate the magic she brought to the game. She made it impossible to look away, and even those who didn't know a layup from a free throw suddenly found themselves becoming fans. And then came the 2024 WNBA draft. Oh boy, what a show that was. Clark was the first overall pick, no surprises there, and she was headed to the Indiana Fever. The draft itself became an event, pulling in 2.45 million viewers, the highest in WNBA history. Yes, you read that right. It felt like the WNBA finally had its own version of the NFL draft frenzy. People weren't just watching to see who got picked next. They were there to see where Clark would land, and when she was selected by Indiana, it was like fireworks went off. And let's not even talk about merchandise sales. Clark's jersey was flying off the shelves like it had magical powers. People were treating it like the golden ticket to a WNBA renaissance. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Once Clark arrived in Indiana, her impact was felt immediately. Fever home games became the hottest ticket in town, with an average of 16,571 fans packing the arena. To give you an idea of how wild that is, no other team came even close to drawing those kinds of crowds. It was like going to a concert where every single performance was a sellout. Fans were willing to pay top dollar just to see her in action. Even when the Fever played on the road, they drew 36% more fans than any other team. Clark wasn't just a local star in Indiana, she had become a national sensation. People everywhere wanted a piece of the Caitlin Clark experience. Now, let's be real. The WNBA had been trying to carve out its spot in the competitive sports world for years. Getting consistent viewership wasn't easy, and the league often struggled to stay relevant compared to other sports. But then Caitlin Clark entered the picture, and everything changed. Her games became must-watch TV. It didn't matter if you were a longtime WNBA fan or someone who didn't know the difference between a jump shot and a dunk. If Caitlin Clark was playing, you were watching. In fact, Out of the top 12 most-watched games of the season, all 12 had one thing in common. Clark was on the court. She became the WNBA's center of gravity, pulling everyone from fans to networks into her orbit. It was like the entire league revolved around her. And honestly, it kind of did. The Clark effect wasn't just limited to fans or ticket sales either. It shook up the entire WNBA ecosystem. ESPN, one of the league's main broadcasters, saw a 170% increase in viewership for games featuring Clark. Yes, you read that right, 170%. That's not a small bump. That's a full-blown explosion in interest. Networks that had previously struggled to get people to tune into WNBA games were suddenly reaping the rewards. And they had one person to thank: Caitlin Clark. Sponsors, advertisers, broadcasters, everyone wanted in on the action. It wasn't just a great season for the Indiana Fever. It was a massive win for the WNBA as a whole. For once, the league wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. But as much as we loved riding the Caitlin Clark wave, all good things must come to an end, right? And when Clark and the Fever were eliminated from postseason contention, the drop-off was hard to ignore. Viewership took a nosedive, falling from 2.45 million viewers to under 500,000 almost overnight. That kind of drop is practically unheard of in professional sports. Clark's absence didn't just lower the stakes, it sucked the life out of the playoffs entirely. It wasn't like the other teams didn't have talent. There were still some incredible athletes playing in those postseason games. But let's be honest, fans weren't there for them. They were there for Clark. And when she wasn't on the court anymore, people just stopped caring. It was like going to a party where the DJ leaves after playing one song. Sure, there are still people there, and the music's playing, but the energy? Gone. The empty seats during the playoffs were another sign of how dependent the league had become on Caitlin Clark. During the regular season, Fever games were packed, whether they were playing at home or on the road. But as soon as the Fever were eliminated, it was like someone turned off the lights. Playoff arenas, which should have been buzzing with excitement, suddenly felt like ghost towns. Fans who had been traveling just to watch Clark work her magic were now staying home, and who could blame them? The playoffs without Caitlin felt like watching a movie without the main character. Even ESPN, which had been riding the high of Clark's regular season games, felt the sting of her absence. The playoff ratings didn't just dip, they plummeted. Networks and advertisers who had been banking on the Clark effect to carry them through were left scratching their heads, wondering what happened. Without Caitlin Clark in the picture, the WNBA's audience evaporated, and it became glaringly obvious just how reliant the league had become on her. This kind of dependence on a single player is risky for any sports league. Sure, every league has its stars, but usually the show can go on without them. The WNBA, though, had built so much of its momentum around Clark that when she was out of the picture, it felt like the season had lost its purpose. Playoff games that should have been marquee events turned into afterthoughts. Fans tuned out, and the excitement that had carried the league through the regular season was nowhere to be found. So where does the WNBA go from here? Caitlin Clark's star power undoubtedly brought the league to new heights, but her absence during the postseason revealed some major cracks. The WNBA can't rely on one player to carry the entire league. If they want to build on the success of the 2024 season, they need to figure out how to keep fans engaged, even when Clark isn't on the court. One solution is to invest more in promoting other players. The WNBA is filled with talented athletes, but let's be honest, most of them don't get nearly the same attention as Clark. By shining a brighter spotlight on the league's other stars, the WNBA can create a more balanced ecosystem where multiple players are drawing fans in. This way, the league doesn't fall off a cliff if one player isn't playing. Another potential fix is to capitalize on the fan engagement that Clark has already sparked. The league should take advantage of the excitement she's generated and use it to create long-term loyalty among new fans. Whether it's through social media, interactive fan experiences, or partnerships with influencers, the WNBA needs to find ways to keep fans connected to the league even when Clark isn't the headline. Caitlin Clark's impact on the WNBA is undeniable. She single-handedly brought the league to new heights, turning every game she played into a must-see event. But the sharp decline in viewership once she was out of the picture highlights the challenges the WNBA faces in maintaining its momentum. If the league wants to continue growing, it needs to learn from the Clark effect and find ways to build a more sustainable future, one where the excitement doesn't disappear the moment the season ends. And there you have it. Without Caitlin Clark, the WNBA finds itself in a bit of a tailspin, scrambling to figure out how to keep the fans hooked. Whether they can rise from this setback or continue to struggle without their star remains to be seen. But one thing's for sure, they've got work to do. What do you think? Can the WNBA bounce back, or are they too reliant on one player? Share your thoughts down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.